This move is hella good. It might not look that good because it doesn't have a lot of range, it doesn't deal a lot of damage, and even on hit, it doesn't even combo into anything. Don't worry, I'll let you in on the secret on why this move is so good. It's because it's +2 on block. If this is you, you probably don't know much about frame data, if at all. Don't worry, because in this video, I'm going to be going over the practical things you need to know about frame data and how to use it to your advantage. To start, we need to measure time. Street Fighter V, like many other fighting games, is run at 60 frames per second. For any move you do in Street Fighter V, there are 3 main phases: the startup frames, the active frames, and the recovery frames. The startup is the number of frames a move has before it is capable of dealing damage. A good analogy for this is in the Civil War era trying to load a musket. Gerald from Corey Gaming explains this very nicely.
If you've ever seen a Civil War movie, it's immediately obvious why we don't use rifle muskets anymore. It has a ridiculous startup time, and by the time you're able to do any damage, you might already be dead. When it comes to startup, we want it to be faster!
The active frames are where a move can actually deal damage. A good way to think about this is to consider what's scarier: someone just sticking their leg out in the air, or a flamethrower. The flames, unlike somebody's leg, is always capable of dealing damage as long as it's just out there. This is why the active frame count for most characters' moves is very low, usually ranging anywhere between 2 to 4 active frames. However, Dalsum's Yoga Flames have a ton of active frames. Finally, the recovery frames is the period of time where your character cannot do anything after executing a move. A good example of this is the baseball swing. Any good baseball swing has the follow through step.
Step 7 is follow through.
Basically, you have to follow through because physics. Long recovery is bad because you can't do anything while in recovery frames, such as blocking. Don't worry, you don't have to know the startup, active, and recovery frames of every single one of your moves. However, you should know the startup frames of your character's important moves, if not every single move. Knowing the startup frames of your moves is really important because it dictates what you can use to punish your opponents. More on that later. The active and recovery frames of your moves is not very important except for very niche situations, and when you get to that point, you probably don't need this guide. Okay, now to explain what happens when your move connects with your opponent, which is the whole point of throwing out a move. When your move connects with your opponent, they will be stunned for a certain number of frames, depending on if they blocked it or if they got hit. The number of frames they are stunned for if they blocked is called block stun, and if they got hit, hit stun. You don't need to know what the hit stun and block stun values of your moves are, because that is not your on block and on hit advantage. Take, for example, Ryu's crouching hard kick. Ryu's sweep on block applies a lot of block stun, so your opponent can't do anything for a long time. The problem is, Ryu can't do anything for a long time too, because he has to go through the recovery frames of his sweep. So while Ryu's opponent is in block stun for something like 11 frames, Ryu himself is recovering for like 23 frames. So if you have the correct numbers and you do the math, Ryu turns out to be -11 after crouching hard kick. That means that by the time Ryu's opponent has finished their block stun and can now do something, Ryu has 11 more frames to go before he can do anything like block. And this is how punishes work. I promise I will explain the whole punishing thing, but let me just get through this first. Like Ryu's sweep, Ryu's crouching hard punch on hit deals a lot of hit stun, but because of the recovery of the move, Ryu is actually left at -7. Basically, making your opponent go through a ton of block stun and hit stun is absolutely useless if the recovery you need to go through is much longer. So, block stun and hit stun values are only useful when measured relative to the recovery of the move that is inflicting that stun. Those measurements of stun relative to recovery are called on block and on hit values. So, if a move, on block or on hit, that doesn't matter, leaves you at +1, then you can act 1 frame sooner than your opponent can, meaning that you have the upper hand. However, if a move leaves you at -1, then your opponent is now the one that has the upper hand because now they're the ones that can act 1 frame sooner. You probably notice that these values are kind of symmetrical. You being at +1 is the same as your opponent being at -1 and vice versa. Okay, those are all the practical basics you need to know about frame data. Now here's a couple reasons why knowing frame data is fundamental for any fighting game player. By the way, if you're liking this video so far and want to see when I upload more educational content like this, a sub to the channel would be greatly appreciated. Okay, finally, reasons that frame data is important. Number 1, punishes. Let's go back to our Ryu's sweep example. As mentioned before, Ryu's sweep is very risky, or as we call unsafe, to do because if his opponent blocks, they have 11 whole frames to try to hit Ryu before he can block, which literally everyone in the cast can do. This whole hitting you before you have time to recover from your move is what we call a punish. In this clip, this Akuma bot is punishing my block sweeps with a sweep of his own because Akuma's sweep has a 7-frame startup, which is well within the 11-frame window he has to punish me. This is one of the many reasons knowing the startup frames of your character's moves is critically important, because maybe you're playing Sagat and you block a Ryu sweep and you try to punish him with a sweep of your own. However, Sagat's sweep has a 12-frame startup, meaning it's 1 frame too slow to hit Ryu before he can start blocking. Had you known this, you probably would have gone for something a little faster, like Sagat's standing medium kick. But because you didn't do your homework, Ryu now gets to punish your missed punish attempt with another sweep, which gives him a knockdown and some offensive pressure. Also, if you've ever played on the online ladder and played against a Ken, you probably got hit by this. However, if you've done your homework, you probably know that Ken's hard kick Tatsu on block is -4. If you're not aware, every single character has at least one move that is 4 frames or faster. That means that no matter how much mashing that Ken does after you block his hard kick Tatsu, you can still punish him every single time. Basically, punishes are free damage, and knowing frame data allows you to cash in on more of that free damage. Reasons that frame data is important: number 2, frame traps and knowing when it's your turn. You've probably heard of frame traps by now, but just to reiterate, a frame trap is a string of moves, typically on block, that will beat any normal move and most special moves your opponent might do at any point in the string. Knowing frame data allows you to know which block strings are your best frame traps against any specific character, and will even let you create new block strings on the fly if you're in a weird spacing situation or something like that. For example, with Ryu, standing light punch into standing medium punch is a great frame trap. So Ryu's standing light punch on block is +2. That means that Ryu's next attack will come out 2 frames faster than his opponent's. Which means that if Ryu goes for standing medium punch, which has a 5-frame startup, and Akuma here goes for his fastest move, standing light punch, which has a 3-frame startup, both Akuma and Ryu's moves will become active at the same time. Usually this means that these moves will trade, and Ryu and Akuma will hit each other. However, Street Fighter V has a priority system, which means that if 2 moves of different strength meaning light, medium, or hard, would trade, the heavier move will win. Since Ryu's standing medium punch is heavier than Akuma's standing light punch, Ryu wins this exchange every time and gets a combo out of it. For knowing when it's your turn, this is pretty similar to frame traps, which is why I put them in the same category. Basically, knowing frame data allows you to tell when a situation is in your favor, meaning you can do a move that kinda acts as a frame trap, meaning you will beat anything your opponent might try to do outside of an invincible reversal. Take, for example, after Akuma's forward hard punch, he is left at -2, meaning that Ryu is at +2. If you recall, this is the exact same situation that Ryu's standing light punch on block leaves him, so it's as if Akuma just blocked Ryu's standing light punch. This means that Ryu, just like before, can follow up with standing medium punch to beat Akuma's attempt at pressing a button. There are a lot of situations where your opponent may seem to have the upper hand, but if you know the frame data and you know you have the advantage, you'll be able to get a lot of free openings. Now, we can finally answer the question of why Poison's EX heart rate, shown at the beginning of this video, is so good. This move, both on block and on hit, is +2, which in Street Fighter V is the magic number plus frame situation to be in, because it means that Poison can now throw Ryu and it will beat any normal move that Ryu throws out, because throw has a 5-frame startup and takes priority over light attacks. It creates a mix-up, a topic that deserves its own whole video. But basically, you have to guess, and if you guess wrong, you're going to eat anywhere between 130 to possibly 300 or more damage. There's actually another big reason this move is so good, and it has nothing to do with the frame data of the move. It's the fact that the move pulls you in point blank while also making you -2. Spacing is incredibly important, almost as much as frame data, which is why I made a whole video talking about spacing traps, which is kind of the inverse of frame traps but are just as deadly. Link to that video in the description. But anyways, I'm NotJohnnyKim, and if you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. That would make me as happy as this little guy over here. You can follow me on my other socials shown on the screen, or linked in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next video.